Did the NFL both help and hurt the Baltimore Ravens when it comes to their 2024 schedule? We talk about that and so much more coming up next here on today's episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube and also audio form wherever you get your shows. And we are here for you 5 days per week on Locked On Ravens, bringing you Ravens news, analysis, updates, and more. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. We are here another week closer to Baltimore Ravens football. We still got a couple months to go. We're not super close, but knocking out those weeks one by one. The Ravens schedule officially came out on Wednesday. We know not only who the Ravens are playing, but when they're playing. We know there are certain quirks in there. So we're going to be talking about that for the majority of the show today. Also getting into a couple of housekeeping related stuff. But the NFL, I mean, it's a tough task to schedule out all these games and figure things out. But we're going to be talking about how the NFL both helped the Ravens and hurt the Ravens when it comes to their 2024 schedule, because I've seen a bunch of both, honestly. Like, the Ravens schedule fell really nicely, and then there are all these different things that really hurt them. So in the first part of the show, we're going to talk about the certain quirks to Baltimore schedule that helped them out. And then in the second part of the show, we're going to visit it from the other side, and almost like how the NFL did Baltimore a little bit dirty, and specifically, just a teaser to that, the Christmas Day game. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll also get into the rest difference for Baltimore from this year compared to last year. Also, travel miles too, a factor in there. So we'll get into everything. And I think it's important to talk about because we talked about it a lot last week. If you want more schedule analysis, be sure to check out our episodes from last week. Thursday, Friday, we did a live show on Wednesday night when it came out. But I think it's important to talk about everything. And look, I got to, again, give credit to the NFL for essentially making, because again, a couple of years ago, right? Like, no one really thought twice about the schedule release. It was just like, oh, cool. Here's who they play and when they play, and that's awesome. But the NFL's made it into a very big event. So we'll talk about that all here now. First, the Ravens schedule as a whole, 5 primetime games. They're going to play less games at 1 p.m. this year than they are in the 4 o'clock or 8 o'clock window, which is kind of crazy. But for me, I think the first part of where the NFL helped the Ravens was with the disparity of road games and home games. The Ravens will play 1 extra road game this year. That's based off of the new rule the NFL put in a couple years ago about playing the same place team of the NFC division you played 2 years ago. So Baltimore played the NFC South in 2022, and the Buccaneers won that division. So the Ravens get the Buccaneers for the extra 17th game of the year. But I think that the way that it's out, there are no long home stands. There are no long road trips. And we talked about that a lot last week, but I think that's really big. I mean, for what Baltimore has here, I did this all last week. I'll do it again. I'll just read off where the Ravens are in terms of where they're playing each week. Away, home, away, home, away, home, away, away, home, home, away, away, home, away, home, away, home. You're not going on these 3-game road trips, right? You don't have home stands either, but I think that actually benefits Baltimore. And of course, the NFL didn't really have anything to do with this part. And we'll get to this in the third part of the show a little bit more. But the Ravens aren't traveling super far this year. I mean, they're going to Los Angeles to play the Chargers. Obviously, you got to go to Dallas and to Kansas City and to Houston, but that's not going across the country more than once, right? You're only going to Los Angeles this season. That's big for Baltimore, considering they played the NFC West last year. They had to go abroad. So that was a lot. And Michael Pierce talked about it. We've had players on here who've talked about it. Kaz Ismail, who's a former player, he talked about the travel aspect as well. It can take a toll, right? Obviously, you don't chalk it up as, the Ravens lost this game because they traveled too much. Like, you don't use it as an excuse, but it does take a toll on the players. And I think, one, the Ravens not having to travel all that distance is a big, big thing. But two, the fact that they're able to understand that they're going to be back at home in no time if they're on the road and have a tough road game, right? That's big, in my opinion. I also think look, we'll talk about the rest in the third part of the show again, but Baltimore actually, in terms of rest edges, they have the net edge is apparently the best in the NFL this year. Patriots 2, Minnesota 3, Philly 4, Green Bay 5. Baltimore is crazy. 16 days plus 16 days of net rest edge. And according to Warren Sharp Football Analysis, that's the number one largest net rest edge in his database's history, which dates back 35 years, and it's the largest in modern day NFL history as well. So a lot of people are asking, well, how does that make sense? Because Baltimore has to play 3 games in 10 days, and that's extremely crazy considering week 15, 16, and 17. And we'll talk about this in the second part of the show with how the NFL kind of did Baltimore dirty. You get this December 15th game. That's a Sunday against the Giants. Then that December 21st game is Saturday against the Steelers. Then Wednesday, December 25th against the Texans. Well, right before that week 15 game, the Ravens have their bye week. So that is that 2 full weeks of rest before games. You're playing that in between games, December 1st to December 15th. And so I guess that's nullified in a way. It doesn't really feel like it, but also the other part of this is scheduling the Ravens for week 1 Thursday Night Football against the Chiefs. Usually for Thursday, we talked about it with that stretch in December. That's a short week. Thursday night games are short weeks. It's why they've gotten a lot of controversy, and a lot of people actually are calling for the discontinuation. The NFL is not going to do that, obviously, because of the money. But they're saying, well, it's increased risk for injury, not enough time for these guys to rest and recover their bodies. But week 1, there's no short week. I mean, last game was played in February. That was the Super Bowl. Week 1, Thursday night, is the first game of the year. So you're not coming off of a game. That, to me, does benefit Baltimore. And I think that's a huge part of their schedule this season. Also, we know the Ravens have had a couple of interesting schedule quirks go against them in the last couple of seasons. Not that they don't have any this year. We'll talk about that. But last year, the Ravens, I don't know if this was that help. I think it honestly ended up helping them at the end of the day just because they got it a lot of the way. But at the beginning of the season last year, if you remember, the Ravens had those 3 AFC North divisional games on the road in their first 5 weeks. They were done with their divisional road games after week 5. That was a really tough gauntlet. They had the Bengals in week 2. They won that game. They had the Browns in week 4. They won that game. And then they had the Steelers in week 5, which they lost. But still, the Ravens don't have that this season. They're going to be playing their last away game, AFC North-wise at least, against the Steelers in week 11. That's November 17th, so mid-November. I don't think that's as big of a deal. I mean, you get your divisional games out of the way. It doesn't really matter, but this is a lot more spread out, and some people prefer it that way. Some people are just like, it doesn't matter. But the divisional games for Baltimore this season, you got the Bengals in week 5. That's away. Then you get the Browns away in week 8. Bengals at home, prime time. That's going to be week 10. Steelers the next week. That's going to be week 11 away. Then you get the Steelers, that's not prime time, but 4:30 slot Saturday football. That's week 16. Then you end the season if you're Baltimore in week 18 against the Browns. That one is to be determined. So I personally like the fact that it's spread out a little bit more. It's honestly not that big of a deal, but if I had to have all these divisional games bunched up, I don't know. It feels better to me when it's all stretched out like that is. And then we remember 2 years ago, speaking of division, the Ravens had that Cleveland, where Pittsburgh was their game in the middle. Cleveland had a bye in the middle. That was severely disadvantaging for the Ravens. That was a massive disadvantage. But I think overall, you look at the schedule, and it's fine in a lot of different ways. There aren't a ton of games bunched up. I mean, there are a couple of really rough stretches. And again, the Ravens, they're playing a first-place schedule. The NFL has nothing to do with that. They earn this right. And I think that, look, if you want to be the best, you got to beat the best. And Baltimore has a ton of great teams on their schedule this season. So I'm going to be really, really interested to see how it all pans out for them in the long haul here. Coming to the second part of the show, though, we are going to be talking a little bit more about how the NFL did the Ravens a little bit dirty here on their schedule, because there are a couple of areas where it gets a little dicey. So be sure to stay tuned. We got a lot to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. It's going to take all the time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big one of your own Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Big Denver Nuggets guy over here. Game 7 is coming up. Really, I'm recording this right before it starts. So you're going to be listening to this tomorrow morning. I'm recording this on Sunday evening. So if the Nuggets win, I'll be happy. If they don't, I will not be. But if you want to head over to FanDuel and bet Nikola Jokic props, Anthony Edwards, depending on who advances, you can do that for the next round. Also for the Ravens-Chiefs matchup over on FanDuel, Ravens opened up as 2.5-point underdog. So obviously those lines will be changing over the course of the next couple months. But if you want to get in on that early action, you can do that over on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. Really appreciate everybody for being here and making us a part of your day here on Locked On Ravens. Let's get into it because we did the good, right? We talked about all the good in the Ravens schedule and identifying, hey, you know what? The NFL did this little thing here and it helps out a little bit, did this little thing there. But there are some areas that you don't necessarily love if you're looking at this schedule and you're a Ravens fan. Now, Kyle Van Noy, also the players were a little shocked. Now, there were two different schools of thought here. It felt like for the players, where Kyle Van Noy took to Twitter and he was like, I still can't believe we play 3 games in 10 days. And there was Roquan Smith who posted the schedule on Instagram and said, just line them up. So we know Roquan's intense. We know that's just who he is. But look, Van Noy has a point. We talked about it a little bit in the first part of the show. You play 3 games in 10 days if you're the Ravens. And honestly, if we look around the division, the Steelers also have this exact same thing at the exact same time. The Steelers actually play the Eagles, the Ravens, and the Chiefs in that 10-day span, where the Ravens play the Giants, Steelers, and the Texans. So, I mean, for Baltimore, you're thinking, well, at least it's not. The Steelers have a lot more quality opponents. I guess no disrespect to the Giants. Obviously, Steelers and Texans, 2 very good teams. But, again, you're trading out New York for Philadelphia. I think the Ravens have the better of those two in terms of which one might be at the time easier, but no opponent is easy. No game's a cakewalk. But if I were picking Giants, Steelers, Texans, or Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, I'd probably pick what the Ravens have. But that doesn't mean that the Ravens still didn't get done a little dirty here by the NFL. There are a couple of reasons why in this particular stretch also the Ravens got done a little dirty here. First of all, the Ravens have to go on the road twice in this span. So we talked about how it was away, home, etc. Well, this part of their schedule, they have to go to New York, then they play home against Pittsburgh, and then they go to Houston to play the Texans. So obviously New York is not necessarily that far away, all things considered, considering they're going to LA just a couple weeks prior to that. But still, you're not in the comforts of home, and Baltimore has proven that, they can win games on the road. I'm not worried about that. But at the same time, it's like we talk about the short week from Thursday all the way up until, whenever it is. But with Thursday, there are 2 different elements. One, it's a Thursday game, so you get all the rest. And we'll be talking about, especially for Wednesday, where it's a Christmas game, essentially like they're treating this like, oh, okay, Christmas is the Thursday game, right? So with Wednesday, you get even more time to rest after. The issue is that you have less time to rest. Now, the way this works, it's Sunday, Saturday, Wednesday, December 15th, the 21st, and the 25th. So from Sunday to Saturday, you get the 6 days of rest. Now, the fact that it's a Saturday game and not a Sunday game, hypothetically, would give you the extra day of rest before a quote-unquote Thursday game, but this Thursday game is being played on Wednesday. So it's the same amount of rest from Sunday to Thursday, Saturday to Wednesday. 4 days. You get 4 days rest in between Saturday and Wednesday. So in that 10-day span, you are playing 3 games. That's a lot to ask. That is 180 minutes of football in a 10-day span. That's a lot of collisions. It's a lot of just hits being dished out by both sides. And on top of it, we know how physical those Ravens and Steelers games get. So it's not like, okay, Giants, okay, it's a non-divisional, non-conference game. You're like, okay, still going to be physical, still going to be hard, but you're fine. You're like, all right, there's no rivalry there. We know for Texans, that's a divisional round rematch. It's something where the Ravens are going to have to get up for that game. Houston certainly is, but there's no divisional implication there. It's going to be tough, going to be physical, etc., but there's no quote-unquote rivalry. I think Lamar and CJ are going to have plenty of those games for years to come, but we're not to the point of it being a rivalry, at least at this point. But the Steelers, we know the history. We know divisional implications. It's sure to have playoff implications. I think Pittsburgh will still be in the hunt by this point. Baltimore, I think all 4 teams, honestly, will still be in the hunt by this point. This is a really good division, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Baltimore. But that's going to be a tough physical game. Then you have to turn around 4 days later after that game, after you already had a short week the last week, and play on Christmas, which, by the way, let's just segue into that. The Ravens playing on the road for Christmas 2 years in a row. First team in NFL history to ever do that. Should be the last. There is no reason why the Ravens should be on the road for Christmas 2 years in a row. Now, I get the Ravens are primetime TV. I get Lamar Jackson as primetime TV. I get the Ravens are the best team in the AFC last year, and honestly, the best team in the NFL during the regular season. Obviously, it didn't work out that way in the playoffs, but Baltimore right now is must-see TV. There was a way to do this where it's not impacting the players the way it will, not impacting the coaches, the staff, et cetera, media, whatever it may be. The fact that Baltimore had to go to San Francisco last year, be super far away from their families. 1 year, it happens. You're in the business of the NFL. They have teams that are going to play on Christmas. It happens. But having it be 2 years, even if they were playing at home on Christmas, it will be at least a little better. Still, I wouldn't schedule the same team on Christmas 2 years in a row. But the fact they have to go on the road, I think, was a massive, massive blunder by the NFL. The game should be great. It's not about the game. The game is awesome. The implications are awesome, but it's not about that. The NFL is a business, right? Money rules all. I get it. If you might comment and say, oh, well, the reason is this and money. It is. It's because of the money. It's because Baltimore, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud, those are awesome storylines. But you could have easily put that in prime time. You could have knocked, let's say, the Buccaneers game off of the docket if you wanted to and have it be that way. And there are so many intricacies for scheduling out 32 teams. I mean, I get it, but at the end of the day, athletes are humans, right? The NFL, their priority should be the players. I know they preach it all the time, but this to me does not feel like that. This to me feels like the NFL prioritized matchups and storylines over the players. And so not only are you playing 3 games in 10 days, but there's the added element for these players of, you also got to go and you're not going to be able to see your family on Christmas unless they travel with you to Houston. And that's not fair to them. And I don't know. I just think it's very unfortunate the NFL ended up doing things that way. Those really, though, I mean, Baltimore will have another short week. I mean, they're playing essentially, if you want to count Christmas as a Thursday game, they're playing 3 Thursday night football games this season. Obviously, the first one being week 1 against the Chiefs. Then you have the divisional matchup against Cincinnati in week 10. And then obviously the Houston game on Christmas. But that's another short week where you're playing the Bengals, right? But before that, you got to play the Broncos. You have that November 3rd to November 7th. Now, luckily, this time around at least, both those games are at home. So you're not dealing with any weird, wonky travel stuff. You're playing the Broncos at 1 on November 3rd, week 9. Then the Bengals at 8:15 on November 7th, so 4 days later, week 10. Now, another benefit to that, and this is kind of going back into the first segment a little bit, is you get the long rest before you play the Steelers in Pittsburgh. But there are a bunch of really interesting stretches here, and we'll talk about that with Baltimore's rest factor coming up in the third part of the show here, because I do think there are plenty of interesting conversations to be had about the beginning of the season, the middle of the season, and the end of the season. So it's going to be super interesting to see how Baltimore handles it, because there are some interesting quirks in this schedule, and the Ravens won't be the only ones dealing with them, like we talked about with 3 games in 10 days. But to me, there are plenty of defining stretches, and part of that will be how do they respond to lack of rest? How do they respond to more rest? That should be good, but we know the NFL is a long, grueling physical season, and Baltimore hopefully will be able to get through it injury-free. Obviously, knock on wood. Obviously, injuries happen all the time, but as healthy as they can. I'll say it that way. Coming up, though, we'll be diving into the rest factor for Baltimore, rest difference. We'll get a little bit more that we talked about in the first part of the show about them traveling a bunch last year, and also getting into those key stretches. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to get to on this Monday edition of Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Gametime. I've had a bunch of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life, especially for NFL games. Sometimes I wasn't sure if the seats were good. Other times I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there were just no good deals at all. But with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, if you assume your seat and the lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets. We know the schedule release came out. There are plenty of awesome high-profile games on the Ravens schedule this year. Chiefs in week 1. You got primetime against the Bengals. Obviously, Christmas against the Texans as well. I mean, look, all those games I'd love to attend 100%. And Game Time has it covered, and there are plenty of features over on the Game Time app. And for me, I love it because it is super easy to use, and there are a ton of amazing perks, such as last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last-minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. Plus, the app has pleasantly surprised me in a bunch of different ways. The experience, as I mentioned, they have flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views, lowest price guarantee, Game Time ticket coverage, and so much more. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account. Use code LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. So apply again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON NFL, spell LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. And this show is brought to you by DK Law Group. When you need a law firm, do you want the legal runaround, or would you rather have a no-nonsense approach? Well, you get the latter with DK Law Group. DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech-savvy. They treat clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. DK Law Group is a woman-led firm with Diana Khan at the helm. Diana has been called an unparalleled legal expert by some. One of the things you'll quickly notice with DK Law Group is their transparent pricing. They believe in clarity and costs and no one left in limbo. DK Law Group knows that speed is key. By leveraging technology, DK Law Group streamlines the process to serve you better and faster. Contact DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. Locked On listeners and call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. We're back rounding out Locked On Ravens here. Kevin Ostreicher still talking with you. Really appreciate everybody for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Be sure to subscribe in video form and audio form for 5 days per week, plus bonus content as well, live shows, etc., instant reactions to Ravens news, analysis, update. We have everything here for you. Really appreciate the communities. We've built almost at 7,000 subscribers here on YouTube for Locked On Ravens, the audio version of the show. That community's been growing as well. Social media, subtext. Again, I just can't put into words how much it means to me personally. Let's talk about, more things with Baltimore's schedule, getting into the rest difference and some of the big stretches that Baltimore has this season. And for me, I've split this into 3 sections, if we're being honest. The beginning, the middle, and the end of the season. Pretty straightforward, right? But I think we've seen a lot of national media doubt already about the Ravens, especially when it comes to their first 5 games of the season. Chiefs, Raiders, Cowboys, Bills, Bengals. Those are the first 5 games of the year. And there have been a lot of people already, specifically in the national media, talking about, oh, well, that's a tough schedule. And the Ravens have maybe a chance to finish in the bottom of the division through those first 5 weeks. And I'm thinking, look, Baltimore's a really good team too, right? You have the Chiefs, and I know the Raiders aren't expected to be super competitive this year, but you can't overlook that game. Cowboys, Bills, Bengals, awesome opponents. But we have to remember the Ravens also are really good. Like, they were the best team in the NFL last year in the regular season. And we know the Ravens usually show up in the regular season. So obviously the big question is the playoffs. So when you're talking about questioning the regular season ability, it's like, yeah, they've dealt with injuries for like 4 of the past 5 seasons for the most part. And that's kind of dinged their record a little bit. But last year, when they had a decently clean bill of health, season-ending injury-wise, they still dealt with stuff last year. That's big. Plus, there are no big rest disparities here either. We talked about how Baltimore at this point has, best rest differential apparently in the league. So that'll be big, but there isn't any crazy. It's Thursday, Sunday, 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 Sunday. Nothing crazy. Then you get into the primetime stuff a little bit, but to me, those first 5 weeks are going to be extremely important for how Baltimore wants to perform and get off to a strong start. Their season is going to end with a win or a loss in any of these 5 games. I think specifically the Chiefs game has a lot of people maybe a little worked up about how could define their season, win or loss. It's going to be an emotional game, a game that everybody's going to get up for, particularly on the Ravens side of things. So I think that, it's big, but if they lose, it's not going to end their season. If they win, they're not guaranteed to win the Super Bowl, right? It's just that these games have big impacts across the league when it comes to even December and January, but it's not going to impact, week 1, crown the Ravens, or week 1, end the Ravens. That's not how it goes. So first 5, important. Then the middle stretch of the season, to me, the Commanders is not a game that I expect to be a huge one for Baltimore. Still got to get up for it, but I'm kind of I'm not looking at that one so far right now. The next stretch is week 7 through 13. Buccaneers, Browns, Broncos, Bengals, Steelers, Chargers, Eagles. That is a heck of a middle schedule for the Ravens. Obviously, out of any of those games in that stretch, I think the Broncos will be the one where you're like, yeah, they should probably win that game, right? But the Buccaneers are the NFC South champions. Cleveland, I expect to be competitive this year. Cincinnati as well. Got to respect them in what they do. Although recently the Ravens have had their number. We're going to see. I mean, Joe Burrow coming back. It's obviously a big boost for him. Then Pittsburgh, they're going to be competitive. Chargers, competitive. Eagles. I mean, that's a heck of a middle schedule. So through those weeks, if you maybe go, I don't know, 4-3, that's maybe like a middle. 5-2, I think would be good. 6-1, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, 7 games. I'm doing my math right. I got it down. Yeah, 4-3 is like a middling. All right, kind of a little disappointing. 5-2 is great. 6-1, great. 7-0 obviously is what you want. And then after the bye week, Giants, you're like, yeah, all right. But then that 3-game stretch in those 10 days, that's the thing you have to figure out if you're Baltimore. Those are probably all going to have playoff implications. Those are all going to be huge. And it's not just about winning and losing. It's about divisional record. It's about conference record. That's why if you want the Ravens to lose a game, and obviously I do not, but if they are going to lose a game, you want it to be to an NFC opponent. That's the one. I don't want the Ravens to lose any games this season. But if I had to say, you know what, the Ravens are losing, 3-4 games this year, make it all to NFC opponents. Because that doesn't impact conference record, doesn't impact divisional record, and those are your playoff tiebreakers when it comes down to it, at least initially. So that to me is a really, really big part of this whole equation. So big for the Ravens in terms of their schedule. And also for the Ravens, it's a big day today because Baltimore OTAs, first day, week 1, May 20th. What is today? Today is May 20th. So you're going to have OTAs throughout the course of this week and throughout, late May, early June as we dive into that as well. Then mandatory minicamp comes up. So we're getting closer. We really are. It's exciting. And for the Ravens, hopefully a revenge tour. And hopefully they can get over that final hump to make the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. But preparation for that starts now. So you got the OTAs beginning today. Another step to Baltimore Ravens football. But that's all I have for you here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. Again, be sure to subscribe, follow along, video form, audio form. When we get back here tomorrow, of course, you know what the deal is. More Ravens content. Stay tuned for that. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.